The Daily Derech. We are walking the path of holiness.
Hello, everybody. This is Rabbi Marcus Rubenstein. Welcome to the Daily Derech, a special project of exploring Judaism, the United Synagogue of Conservative Judaism, and the Rabbinical Assembly. Today is the fourth day after Shabbat Kodesh, the 26th of Iyar 5786, corresponding in the secular calendar to Wednesday, May 13th, 2026. We will read Parashat Bamidbar this coming Shabbat, and it is the 41st day of the Omer. Let's begin. Me'am Loez on the Parsha. We'll continue learning the Parsha of Bamidbar, and we're going to continue to talk about this counting. What was the meaning behind the counting that happened with the Jewish people in the wilderness at the beginning of our book of the Torah, of Bamidbar. Now, what I want to talk about today is something a little bit esoteric, a little bit maybe even mystical, but an important part of Judaism, and sometimes I think something we don't talk enough about. We like to speak about, very logical, very ethical kind of stuff that happens with the Torah, very practical details. But this is definitely a little bit more esoteric, a little bit more mystical, and probably takes a little bit more faith to really own. But I think it's important, and I think it's beautiful in some ways, and I think it has a lot to offer us in our modern world today. So, in terms of the way in which the Jewish people walked through the wilderness, there was generally four camps, right? There were four sort of sides in which the Jewish people can dwell surrounding the tabernacle. And it is believed that they sort of kept this formation throughout the wilderness, all the way from the time in which they left Egypt to standing at the foot of Mount Sinai to, at this point already a year into the journey, how they walked. And so this is hinted at in our Parsha and talked about explicitly about how people are set up and how the people stood. And it's interesting to note, why does it matter so much how the people stand around and how are they actually structured when they're moving? And according to at least one tradition from our tradition, from Judaism, there is a mystical sort of midrashic idea that the reason why there was a specific way in which the Jewish people had to walk through the wilderness was because there's actually camps of angels that are aligned to those camps up above in the upper worlds, so that when we're moving, that we are aligned with God's tziva'ot, or God's hosts, God's army, basically, of angels and divine beings that surround God, so that our way we're set up in this world is parallel to the world above. Now, this might sound kind of strange. Really? There are angels up above? I haven't seen them lately. So where are these angels? Now, we're gonna talk about that in just a moment. But it's important, I think, to also note that these angels supposedly were with the Jewish people since leaving Egypt. They were present at Mount Sinai, and they're present still with the Jewish people as they wander through the wilderness. Now, there's a lot of interpretations of sort of what angels are, and there's a long history of angelology within traditional Jewish texts, and sort of how an understanding of angels sort of changed and over time. So it's a large topic, and we could probably have a podcast on that in itself. But I think what's important about this is angels sort of as the ideal infinite pieces of God that are above, that go and do God's bidding, God's will, at least imagined through Jewish texts. And we actually see this throughout Jewish tradition, that especially in the rabbinic period, that whatever is in the world below is also in the world above, right? That there's this sort of imagined world above, God's realm, where it's all divine beings, and that it parallels everything that we build in this world. So just as there's a temple below in Jerusalem, so too there's a heavenly temple above. Just as there are Jews below, there are angels above that align to them. So this is a constant idea. And in some ways, there's this whole tradition of the whole point of Jewish practice is actually to align with the upper worlds of what's going on in the upper worlds of how the angels serve Hashem. And of course, this blows up sort of in Kabbalistic tradition and Kabbalistic understanding, and sort of, in some ways, Kabbalah is all about aligning with the upper worlds, whatever that means. But it's important that we trace this tradition all the way back to the at least the rabbinic times. Now, this tradition or this understanding doesn't come from every commentator. I mean, it's more Kabbalistically inclined commentators. So the source for this in Me'am Loez is from Hilchot De'ot, which is a pretty late, a relatively late midrashic collection. Not ridiculously late, but pretty late. And that's known to have some Kabbalistic parts in it. It appears in Menorat HaMaor, a bit of a lesser-known commentary of the Torah that also includes some Kabbalistic ideas within it. So it's not a tradition for everybody, but I think there's obviously something deep to this, to know that the small movements we take in this world somehow correspond to angelic beings above, and that in some ways all of our life and even the smallest things we do are aligned with are in order to align ourselves with the spiritual reality that is beyond us. That to me, I think, is really meaningful, and honestly is probably the way I actually experience Judaism, as aligning with an upper reality. That's where the joy comes from, of feeling like one is aligned with eternity and is aligned with something deeply spiritual beyond oneself. So, of course, I think this interpretation has what to offer us today. Mishnah Torah. We're going to continue learning the laws of human dispositions, or Hilchot De'ot. We're in the 5th chapter on the 4th halacha. This section of Hilchot De'ot really speaks mostly about the behavior that is expected from a Talmid Chacham, the behavior that is expected from a sage, a rabbi, or a leader of the Jewish people in some way, a Torah leader of some sort, and how they're supposed to behave. Anyone who's expected or thought of by the people to know Torah. By the way, whether it's true or not, right? But if the person wants to preserve that idea, and it's important for their leadership, and it's important for the people, these laws must be followed. But interestingly enough about these laws, I think, yes, they sort of become halachot, or laws for rabbis or for Talmidei Chachamim or leaders, but they're also they're ideals that all should strive for, or in one way or another, maybe not in totality, but at least the pieces of it. So what is it going to talk about here? Well, intimacy, our intimate life with our partner. The Rambam says here, although a man's wife is permitted to him at all times, and of course this is taught towards from the perspective of the men writing it. So, but I do think this can go both ways, certainly. So, in traditional halacha, in terms of sexual or intimate life, a woman once a man is married to a woman, they are permitted to them sexually at all times. Now, obviously, if the wife doesn't want to for some reason, there are considerations to be had here. But for the most part, right, it's mutar. It's permitted for them to have sexual relations, of course. But the Rambam says something very interesting here, that still the Talmid Chacham should behave with kedusha, with holiness, and he should not be matsui etzel ishto. He shouldn't be around his woman, his wife, constantly, like a rooster. Okay? Now, this term, it might sound weird to you, but it's constantly used throughout the Talmud of this ideal of Jewish men, that even in the place where they are permitted for sexual relationships, that they shouldn't act lewdly around their wives. They shouldn't objectify their wives. They shouldn't, be overly wild with that and demanding, but rather to be snew, to be humble, to be modest, to treat one's wife like as a full person, as they are. And so, of course, I find this beautiful, because the Rambam's writing here from the 12th century or something, like very early. So this should not be assumed that the Rambam would necessarily think this way. And the fact that this is also found in the rabbis 1,000 years before that, is pretty incredible, because not everyone would say that. Obviously, objectifying women was something that unfortunately happened all the time. So it's nice to see at least a model created ideally, and as is really halacha for a sage, to be respectful sexually to their wife and their partner, and not act lewdly and talking about them physically in public or constantly badgering them for sexual liaisons per se, at every moment. But a man needs to control themselves. And what I love about this also is, of course, it's not the woman who is obligated to, the one who's sought after to somehow hide herself so that the man doesn't do this, but that it's really, this is all upon the man. Now, of course, this is speaking in a very gendered way about men and women, but I think it certainly applies to, men and men, a woman and a woman, in all kinds of intimate relationships. Obviously, I think the impact here is greater in the traditional sense because so many times men did not treat women in that way of respect. So it shows how a sage should behave. And now, I think it's important to understand that this does not mean that Judaism is somehow sex negative in some ways, or that thinks that sex is a bad act in itself. Rather, that one shouldn't be so overtaken by their desire that they no longer are in control of themselves. And also what happens when they're so full of desires that they end up objectifying or using the partner for sexual satisfaction, and that is not something allowed for a scholar, and ideally should not be something that even a Jewish layperson should be doing as well. So the practice in old times was actually for a scholar to only have sex on the Sabbath, actually reserve the rest of the weekday for Torah learning, and that's where we get sort of this idea of having sexual pleasure on the Sabbath, and that was a way of just like not constantly using a woman as a sexual object, or one's partner as a sexual object. He talks here about the way one speaks to her, right, with respect, and really treating her like a full person and giving her time for regular conversation, to be respectful of her, even during the sexual act itself. And he even explicitly states, she should not be asleep when they have sex. Okay. And very key line, nor should the man take her by force against her will. So very interesting. So we now have a halakhic prohibition. And by the way, this is not just for scholars. This is actually for everybody, as quoted in Nedarim 20b, that actually says this, that we're actually not allowed, even between a man and one's wife, where sexual relations are technically permitted. That doesn't mean that the man can have sex with, or the wife even can have sex with a man, or obviously any sexual gender partnership, without the consent of both parties. And so the fact that we already see this within the Talmud itself, and then we of course see it codified within the Rambam, is quite powerful. And I think it's beautiful in terms of the way Judaism here seems very much ahead of its time. Now, it's not like it's the most feminist thing in the world. No one's saying that. I'm trying not to read it, outside of history. But at least in its time, this seems at least a little forward thinking, and certainly provides a model for how Jewish intimate relationships should work, ideally, especially in today's society when it might not be like that as much. So very instructive. Menorat HaMaor. We'll continue learning the introduction to the first candle, the first section of this wonderful sefer. And we're going to continue to talk about the role lust plays and desire plays in our life, in our mental health, our spiritual state, our relationship with Hashem. And so here he begins by saying, even if the person does not pursue them in a forbidden manner, and who's them? This is, I think he's talking here in a sexual purpose, right? Going after a particular person you're attracted to. But it certainly can apply to anything that we lust after or desire after. And even if pursuing this is actually completely permitted, right? It's not like forbidden to want more money. It's not forbidden to want a nice car. It's not forbidden to want a nice house. It's not forbidden to have sexual attraction to someone in this world, God forbid. And it is permitted to go after these things in many cases. Still, by doing so and by sort of spending much time and being driven by this desire, one wastes one's days in the vanities of this world. And Mikale Yamav, he cuts his days short in the Havle Olam, in the vanities of this world. And I think this is so important because I think for us, many of us, it doesn't drive us as much to say we shouldn't do something because the Torah says not to, or that it's forbidden, but it drives us often more to understand by doing so, we actually lose our identity. We lose who we are. And that's really what's going on here. When we're driven around by what we desire and what we lust, we lose what we're supposed to actually be doing in this world. We lose our ethical compass. We lose our desire to do good. Because the body just can't feel so many desires at one time actively. If we're constantly feeling the desire for a particular person sexually, or a drug, or or food, or a luxury item, or something, whatever, it's very hard. And I think we all understand this tactilely. We all understand that it's pretty hard to think about anything else. It sort of takes over everything. It's contagious. And in doing so, we lose the drive to actually do what we're supposed to actually be doing in this world. He then also, of course, says that in doing so, he won't be able to attain any good. And for me, I think the most moving part that he says is that he remains idle from the very purpose for which he was created. It's almost like you're going through life spinning your wheels. You weren't created to base your entire life around pursuing a drug, or pursuing a particular person, or pursuing a particular luxury good, or what have you, but rather you're supposed to be spending your time trying to do the good, trying to do mitzvot in this world, to make this world a better place to serve Hashem. And by replacing that desire, we remain sort of in idle, and never achieve the purpose for which we were created in the first place. Very, very important. To illustrate this, they bring a Gemara, they bring a particular Agadata from Tractate Sota 9a, and this actually is about the ritual of the Sota. The ritual of the Sota, just a reminder of a difficult ritual, but a whole tractate about a very interesting ritual. Is the case in which a woman is thought to be cheating on her spouse, and she is sort of submitted to this sota test, where she drinks this water in which the name of God has been burned into the water as ashes, and she drinks this ash water, and if she dies, that means she was cheating on her spouse, and if she doesn't, it's a divine sign that she stayed true. So obviously, a very hard ritual, and again, anything that involves, honestly, in the Torah, involves doing something against to a woman legislated by a man is hard to swallow. So we're not talking about doing this practically in the real world, but we're going to just use this as a model to learn a lesson from it. So, and I think the lesson is quite fitting. So what the Gemara says is that the sota, meaning the woman who might have been sexually involved with a partner outside of her marriage, the sota set her eyes on one who was not fitting for her, meaning the person who she wasn't supposed to be with. What she sought was not given to her, meaning she didn't get to be with this person, and it's taken away from her anything she did have, which of course is her previous relationship, and of course, if the sota test goes badly, her life. And so this is usually the framework, right? Desire doesn't just eliminate the thing that we're desiring. It doesn't make it so that it's not only that we probably won't achieve what we actually desire and get and be satisfied from it, but we'll also lose everything we already have. And that honestly is more important. Another example the Menorat HaMaor gives is from the primordial serpent, Anachash HaKadmoni. Who is this? This is a snake in the Garden of Eden, who, according to Midrash, set his eyes on Chava, who set his eyes on Eve, the snake, and wanted to be with her in a sexual way. This is actually one of the Midrashic interpretations of the Adam and Eve story, is that the snake actually wanted to kill Adam and be sexually with Eve, and that this really is the actual intent of the serpent. And because of this, because he tries to do this, what he sought was not given to him, and what he had was taken from him. So the Holy One, blessed be he, said, according to the Menorat HaMaor here, I said he would be king over all beasts and animals. Now cursed are you above all cattle, right? So the snake was supposed to sort of be the mayor of the animals, right? And sort of be in charge and have some authority. But now he's lower than even cattle. He was supposed to walk upright. Supposedly the snake used to have legs and arms, just like human beings did. And now no longer. Now the snake slithers along on their belly. Original intention was that the snake would eat what man eat, the food of man. But now instead they eat dust. And of course, snakes don't actually eat dust and earth, but the rabbis certainly thought they did, that actually they're kind of cursed to eat dirt the rest of their life. So again, it's another great example. The reason it's being brought here is something that wanted something that was sort of that he wasn't supposed to have, and he becomes loses everything that he had in the future because of that, and he's no longer able to be who he was supposed to be in the world. I like that this is brought here because, of course, if it was the only example was brought was the example of the sota, it would all be about women, and the example only would be women lusting after their lust. But I'm glad at least the snake was brought here to show that it is not just women, God forbid, but this is something we all deal with. It's a reality for every one of us. So it's something we have to constantly work against. And again, hope you found it enlightening. Well, that's it for today, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to the Daily Derech. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to email me anytime at rmr@templeofaaron.org. Thank you so much for listening. There are so many people to thank, and you can look in the show notes for that. And also, if you want to know and see any of these texts in the original, we actually have that too. You can actually find that in our episode description. So look in each of the episode descriptions, and you'll find that information right there. Thank you very much. Have a great day, everybody.